Laura Pappano is an award-winning journalist and author who has written about K through 12 and higher education for over 30 years. A former education columnist for the Boston Globe, Pappano has written about education for the New York Times, the Hettinger Report, Harvard Education Letter, the Washington Post, USA Today, and the Christian Science Monitor, among other publications. She is the author or co-author of 3 books: The Connection Gap, Why Americans Feel So Alone, Playing with the Boys, Why Separate is Not Equal in Sports, and Inside School Turnarounds. Laura, thank you for being here. Kelly, thank you for joining her.
Thank you, Sarah and Jay, so much. This is like the coolest bookstore. I love it. Thank you, Rosie. And thank you all, Kelly and the Alliance and Lakitria. This is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. One of the things that I've appreciated working on this book and going around the country is hearing and meeting people on the ground who are in it right now. This is a really consequential year, and I am grateful for this opportunity. So this is from a chapter, How Schools Are Becoming Partisan and Political. In the summer of 1996, Nancy Garrett was among 97 Tennesseans chosen to carry the Olympic torch on its journey to Atlanta for the opening of the Summer Games. Garrett, a compact package of competence and social energy who speaks with a warm Southern lilt, was 6 months pregnant with her son as she made the gentle jog, a very short distance, she said, right through the middle of District 12 in Williamson County, referring to the voting map. It was a huge honor, but not really a surprise. Garrett has deep roots in this Tony Nashville suburb, emerald green fields and split rail fences. She grew up here, the third of 5 girls. Her father, William Nelson, was a popular chemistry teacher at Franklin High School, where Garrett graduated in 1979. Her dad was so beloved that when he died in 2017, a former student, Bill Lee, who was elected governor in 2018, paused a bus tour he was making around the state to speak at the funeral. Garrett may be equally well beloved. For decades, she has been a relentless community, church, and school volunteer. She has also, importantly, in the state and county, been an active Republican who has held signs, posted signs in her yard, canvassed, donated, and worked the polls for other Republicans, as well as Republicans running for nonpartisan posts, such as aldermen. Sure, she had a serious paid job as a senior knowledge leader at a Fortune 50 company, but Garrett is one of those whom others count on to step up to the plate and lead. And she has. She helped found an area service nonprofit, Hands on Nashville. She started a summer school reading program and held PTO leadership posts for 12 years. In 2016, Garrett was appointed by the County Commission to fill a vacancy on the Williamson County School Board. In 2018, she was reelected. In 2020, she became the board chair. But when it came time to seek reelection in 2022, she faced a challenge. It wasn't directly related to the pandemic issues she and her board navigated. It was political. After Governor Lee in November 2021 signed a law allowing county political parties to have partisan school board elections, Williamson County, for the first time, had candidates aligned with a political party. Garrett was appalled. Suddenly, she found herself carrying a different torch, this one for keeping politics out of school board races. Despite her Republican connections, Garrett decided to run as unaffiliated. To her, the choice was clear and principled. If you have grown up in education, there's no way you'll run as a partisan candidate, she told me, a stance she repeated often and made clear on her campaign website. There is no way I would run as a Republican. It's a double standard. We expect our teachers to be nonpartisan in the classroom, and so why don't we hold ourselves to the same standard? Nancy Garrett's stance is rooted in her deep sense of community and in the belief, one that so many have long shared, that public schools and their administration should be a local task, and that leading was about care for the next generation, about steering the ship in providing for young people what, especially in Williamson County, families had moved there to find. But for many others, school boards have become something else entirely. They become the means to a political end. Steve Bannon, who has a knack for spilling the beans and revealing far-right thinking, said as much in August 2022. In 2018, as a member of the Trump administration, he told the writer Michael Lewis, "Democrats don't matter, the real opposition is the media. And the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit." Another share. This is not about persuasion, this is about disorientation. In other words, Bannon tells you exactly what the far right is doing. No apologies, just plain strategy. So when he did it again at the Conservative Political Action Committee Conference, CPAC, in Dallas in early August 2022, it was hardly a surprise. Bannon hosted his show, War Room Pandemic, on Real America's Voice, a far-right network from the CPAC, and conducted interviews. In one of those interviews, he talked about education, specifically school boards. He spoke with Glenn Story, co-founder and CEO of Patriot Mobile, a Texas-based Christian cell phone carrier, and Lee Wamsgans, executive director of Patriot Mobile Action, a PAC, Political Action Committee, formed in early 2022. Patriot Mobile Action recently spent about $400,000 on campaigns that in the end won 11 school board seats. As he approached Story, Bannon grew excited. Now let's talk about PACs. As I said last night, one of the keys to these is school boards, right? The school boards are the key that picks the lock, he said. He then asked Story to tell us about what you did in Tarrant County. In case anyone doubted, Bannon made it clear. School board elections are not about kids, schools, and local communities. Rather, they are tools, the building blocks of party power. Story praised Wamsgans. She puts hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours of interviewing candidates for the PAC to support, he said, adding, "We want every seat." Wamsgans cast the win in even more strategic terms. Those 11 seats enabled them to flip 4 school boards. In all 4 of those school boards, we did not have a school board majority, she said. The wins mean that North Texas now has over 100,000 students that before May had leftist leadership. Now they have conservative leadership. Not only did candidates win seats, but they gained leadership posts. President, vice president, and secretary on those boards. Never mind that school boards in Texas are theoretically nonpartisan and all about serving the local community. To be clear, the far right has not been quiet about its intentions to build, train, and support a ground army of school board candidates. School boards have been seen as sleepy local bodies that passed budgets, debated capital expenditures, does the high school get a swimming pool, and voted on issues from school start times and the district calendar to teacher contracts. But they've also long made consequential decisions that got little attention, such as deciding whether a high school health clinic would provide contraception. The old perception of school boards as a backwater of American politics was not wrong, but it is incomplete. There is a powerful history of women using schools and school boards to exert political influence before they won the vote. School boards were also flashpoints for confrontation following Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka in 1954 and later during court-ordered desegregation. But it was during the 1970s that the Christian right most clearly saw and began to act on available opportunities they found in the American political system, particularly in schools. So why did I write this book? Because I wasn't planning to write this book, I didn't even want to write the book, and I've covered education for over 30 years, and I saw a lot of stuff going on in schools that was not about education. So one of the first things I did is I booked myself into the Moms for Liberty Summit in Tampa, Florida in July 2022. And I was down there in Tampa, and as a journalist, I decided, I am registering under my name, and I did that, but I also dressed to fit in, as I do when I do all my reporting. I'm not gonna interview the lieutenant governor in sweatpants, right? But I might go to a gym in sweatpants. So I did get myself a red blazer and purchased a American flag pin that I put in the lapel, and I did wear red, white, and blue clothing. So when I breezed into the Marriott in Tampa, the woman at the desk whispered, she said, "We're with you, upgrading everybody." So then suddenly I am on a high floor with a water view, and that I didn't ask for. Oddly enough, at the very same time, kitty corner to the Marriott is the Tampa Convention Center. And the convention center was hosting MetroCon at the very same time, which was billed as Florida's largest anime gathering. So in between the hotel lobby, the streets, there are Moms for Liberty attendees, and then there are people with horns and glitter and wings and colonial garb and a lot of lycra. So it was a very surreal experience for me. So I enter into the Moms for Liberty Summit. There are about 500 people, mostly moms. And as a journalist, what I always do, and I'm used to encountering things, and it's my question to myself is not like, do you agree or disagree with this? It's like, what are they saying? What's the argument? What's the logic? How does this fit together? What are they trying to do here? So within half an hour, I'm hearing from the stage that sending your children to public schools for 30 to 35 hours a week is like sending them to a Maoist reform prison camp. And I am hearing very soon after that social emotional learning, which I wrote about when it was first happening, I think I did a Globe column on it, was a form of Marxist indoctrination. I was in yet another session where I was hearing that teachers are trying to change the gender of your child, and they have forms. They're actually paper forms to do it. And I was just baffled. And over and over the course of 4 days, I saw a kind of, and at that time I was also a theater board chair of Longmore Theater in New Haven, and it was like a production. Right down to the costumes. I mean, Tina Descovich on Sunday morning was wearing an A-line lemon yellow dress that looked right out of the 1950s. The messaging over and over to these moms in the room was that you may not be comfortable standing up, running for school board, speaking out, objecting. You may be more comfortable just taking a back seat, and they actually even alluded to folding laundry. And my husband does the laundry. He does a very good job. But it was a scare. The message was your children are in existential danger. They're being harmed by the very teachers, schools, leaders in schools that are supposed to be helping and educating them. And so this message of fear, the language, just like the Red Scare. Same language and argument. And the drumbeat of fear was so constant and powerful. I heard it from DeSantis, even Ben Carson. It's like, yes, Jesus says, yes, you're going to face, challenges, but that's part of what you're doing. That's part of your challenge. That's part of your job. So it was really striking to me how easily and fervently they were brought along with this kind of psychological argument. And I realized this in particular when one of the board members for Moms for Liberty was talking about the Don't Say Gay law, which had recently passed, and everyone was all excited about it, and was saying that, the law is great, but we need to do a few things to it. We need to, add some stuff. And he said, it's like if you have an AK-47 and you want to put on, a laser pointer, you want to put on a flashlight, And I was disgusted. This was about 8 weeks after Uvalde. And I was like, how can he use that as a metaphor in this conversation? But even more upsetting was that not a peep in the room. And that told me that people were just they weren't running things through their brains. There's no, does this make sense? This was just, we're buying this package and we're gonna follow the instructions. And Ron DeSantis further emphasized that when he stood up and he said, he goes, for the first time ever, I'm endorsing 30 people for school board. Never done before. And constantly throughout the summit, people were asked to stand if they were running for school board, lots of applause. And they seemed genuinely just flattered that Ron DeSantis, who at that time had a promising presidential campaign, that he was, going to endorse them. And the minute I'm watching this, I'm like, no, it's the opposite that's going on. Ron DeSantis is leaning on the best people in communities, organized network, active moms to be his turnout agent, his ground army, in order to get support. It did not end up working out for him, but maybe for different reasons. So there's much that we can talk about. We should talk about Patriot Mobile. I'll just share a little bit about them. So Patriot Mobile is a Christian cell phone company based in Texas. They take 5% of all of their profits and donate them to far-right causes, which they list right on their website. The reason that they're important is because in early 2022, they did an experiment that's now being copied all around the country. And what they did is they formed a super PAC, Patriot Mobile Action, which, by the way, was the main sponsor of the second Moms for Liberty Summit in Philly. But what they did is they spent $400,000. Obviously, they're a super PAC, so they had to create local PACs in order to give the money to the local PACs. So they spent $400,000 on 11 school board races. And as you heard, won all those races. What I was doing when I was looking at the campaign finance reports and also looking at how the money was being spent is I noticed that a lot of money was going through Axiom Strategies in Kansas City, Missouri, which if you go and dig, you can find very easily that they are a national political campaign outfit that does Ted Cruz, Ron DeSantis, Glenn Youngkin. So suddenly you have national political strategists helping local school board people get elected. And I saw the flyers. I mean, glossy flyers. I saw box trucks with the candidates on them. I mean, it's pretty stunning. So in Texas, where the voter turnout rate for some of these elections is 8 and 10%, you have basically bought yourself name recognition. And it's not really surprising that these 11 candidates won. One did need to go to a runoff, and I was fascinated to notice that Ted Cruz was suddenly tweeting his support for this candidate in Mansfield ISD. So what we have seen since is that we see the 1776 Project, which was Donald Trump's answer to 1619 Project. That commission formed a PAC, the 1776 Project. And 2 cycles ago, they started donating money to, they would identify school board candidates around the country, and you could go on their website and you could see who they were supporting. What's been very interesting now is, and there are many more people now, PACs, donating this kind of money, because it doesn't take a lot to win a school board race. But they no longer are identifying, you could kind of very easily, if you were on the other side, say, okay, don't vote for, this person. But they're being much stealthier about it. And I know that Moms for Liberty had announced it in Philly last July that they were going to go big on the school boards. They've been very quiet. And in fact, I was, mentioning that when I was just in Howard County, Maryland last Friday, there is a school board race on May 14th, and one of the candidates was the founder of the local chapter of Moms for Liberty, but excused herself from the chapter in order to run. So, I know you have questions. And we have
Kelly, I was remiss in introducing the Alliance. Could you tell folks just who the Alliance for Grosse Pointe Public Schools is?
Sure. We are a group of parents, community members actually here in the area. We're concerned about the school system that comprises Grosse Pointe and Harper Woods, particularly post most recent election with this board. And we are here to keep the board accountable on the one hand, but also to support the public schools that we love so much, the teachers and administrations. So we are doing what we can to keep our schools the best. Thanks, Sarah. Let's see, getting back to Steve Bannon's comment about strategy and the key that picks the lock. What is the lock? And I guess that would also lead to another question about is there an end game? Is there an ultimate goal by just focusing on the school boards?
So, with the school boards, what the far right has discovered, and Moms for Liberty deserves credit for this, is they discovered that school boards actually matter because of the people who will turn out and show up in our network. I mean, because in 2024, it's all about turnout or suppressing turnout, however you look at it. They're the key that picks the lock because you can create policies. Now, many school boards don't have an obligation to dig into the details of local communities. In fact, in Pennsylvania, I sat down with a school board trustee who said, by law in Pennsylvania, the only thing we have to do is approve textbooks, and deal with the fiscal stuff. But we don't get involved because I leave that to the professionals. But what we're seeing is the opposite happen. School boards, and I was reading a Leadership Institute school board training, some materials recently, where they're like, we can change the whole way the school operates. And I'll give you an example. One of those districts in Texas, Keller ISD, they got their far-right school board that they wanted, and the school board, among the many things they did, is they decided to change how books would be bought for the library. And in the course of writing this book, I spent a lot of time talking with librarians and asking, okay, walk me through your training. Walk me through, It's not as if everyone is issued a package of books. Librarians curate the books to suit their communities. And yet in Keller ISD, that suddenly the board was going to be making decisions about which books would be purchased. And they had to approve, they weren't making all the decisions, but they were approving all the purchases. And they would take 30 days and everyone in the community would review it. So this librarian, this 5.5 hour board meeting, and I know you guys have way exceeded the 5.5 hour school board meeting. But this librarian stood up to the mic and she said, I can no longer get books about camels or football or squirrels. I cannot get the latest Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the Guinness Book of World Records, or ABC Cats for my youngest readers in any timely manner because of this policy. Obviously, the policy was engineered to keep certain kinds of books, kind of suppress certain kinds of books, but it had the effect of really making it harder for kids in the district to just get books to read. So there are a lot of consequences, and that's a form of power. And the power goes, the turnout and getting people connected and involved in races, and that is part of the agenda.
And, right, I don't know if this has to do with another question we had about, in the book you also mentioned that the school board races can affect the ballot upwards. And is that the same thing?
Well, that's what I'm talking about, yes, is that, I mean, sometimes the school board races are sometimes the only race on the ballot, but oftentimes there are multiple races on the ballot. People have become very interested in school board races, and but they don't always look at all the information. And so you get extremists who will turn out for the school board race, for the city council. I was talking with someone in Ohio who said our city council voted to ban abortion, even though we don't have any abortion clinics in our district. So what you're getting is a kind of, kind of campaign for a certain kind of, a set of things. And when I was down in Tennessee, there were one of the reasons that Nancy Garrett lost, and it was painful to watch people come up, give her hugs, say, appreciate how much she had done for the community, but they didn't vote for her because there were sticks and ballot things with everybody on the ballot. So the school board races have the opportunity to drive turnout if you get people to turn out, and they get people. Right now, people are talking about it at the national level, at the local level.
And several examples in your book come from situations in Florida, Texas. Do you see a difference in what's happening in the southern part of the country versus the rest?
So when I was first doing the reporting for the book, I obviously went to the places where the stuff was happening, right? So I went to Texas and Florida and Tennessee and eastern Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. And at the time I was doing that reporting, I was like, geez, this might all be over when by the time the book comes out. So, I mean, and maybe it just will be these places. But I have seen anything but. It is something that is now in communities everywhere, and I think that is largely because of the language has become, national language has become grafted onto local issues. And I'll give you an example. I've done some reporting in Idaho, in North Idaho, rural district, and I wrote a piece for the Hechinger Report and for Vanity Fair, and I followed an election, a far right, some extremists, who had no connection to the school district but got elected. One said he was called by God to serve, and then, proceeded to help lead this situation where they had needed English language arts curriculum, got it, it was in the hallways, sent it, voted, got it rescinded and sent back because it contained social emotional learning. So when I was there, they were starting their second year with no curriculum for teaching kids in grades K through 6 to read. So, and at the same time, they'd failed, a levy had failed. Idaho has different finance system, but not a very good one. So they lost a third of their budget. There was worries they were going to be cutting sports. I listened to another very long school board meeting in which a principal said, we're not cleaning our buildings enough. There are mice running over children's feet. And yet when I was on the ground on election day in West Bonner County on a dirt road outside of Masonic Lodge, which was a voting place, I was standing next to one of the far right candidates who was running, and that candidate's representative was saying, he will keep boys out of girls' bathrooms. And the literature had transgenderism, which is a complete slur, and and also transgender issues themselves were really not the issue in the district. The issue in the district was that they didn't have a curriculum, they weren't cleaning their buildings, they didn't have enough money, and yet here you see people being activated by the language, the national level language in a local race. And Moms for Liberty has gotten very good, along with Steve Bannon and Alec and, all of these groups, to having this language. And you see it showing up in school boards, you see it showing up when individuals get targeted, like librarians, targeted as, groomers and pedophiles online. A number of them that I interviewed left. And then you see things in the state legislature. So those are the 3 places where these sort of things are showing up. So that's why also the up ballot to kind of get to that a bit.
Keisha, you want to ask a question?
I do. I want to go back to something you said earlier about stealthiness and fear, and the way that Moms for Liberty was able to engage people through fear tactics. So in this community, it's a little different. If you don't want to invoke fear at all, so it's very hard to talk about these issues. And if you do, they'll say you're fear mongering, or accuse you of whatever, if you're trying to inform and educate. And it's also, there's an element of stealthiness, because it's very difficult to connect the dots. Like, you've done the research, you've been on the ground, you know the keywords, you know the strategies that are used. How do you do that for the greater community without invoking fear, but also trying to show that although these words and terms aren't being used here, there is an element of stealth where these are the things you should be paying attention to. These are the ways that you can connect the dots to what's happening on the local level, even if it looks differently.
Right, so that is just a great question. And I'll start by going a little bit national. I was asked in February to come and meet with the House Democratic Caucus in DC. And I was told that, people might come in and out and, maybe they won't stay. It was standing room only for an hour. And their key question was they wanted to understand parental rights, because they were hearing an awful lot about parental rights. And that's one of those language things. And parental rights, parents already have rights. And I would argue, more importantly, parents have influence. I mean, when I was in Idaho, I sat down with a dad on election day whose Facebook has the American flag and the Second Amendment. And he said the idea that he has 8 kids, and he said the idea that they're indoctrinating my children, he said, is a bunch of paranoid bull honky. He said, I am involved in my kids' lives enough so that the kids come home, but they have something to say it doesn't make sense to me, we talk about it. You're not going to agree with everything. So parental rights is one of those things, and yet we see that being invoked in school board races, and being used as a tool to get legislation that actually is a tool for controlling curriculum, what gets hung on the walls, a whole panoply of control. And one of the ways of thinking about it is really that we have teachers, librarians, school leaders who are professionals who know how to do this work. And I think we have to lean on the respect and the need for them to do that work, rather than just piling on all of this language. The rights language is a direct outgrowth of the religious right back in the 1970s. So 1970s, Jerry Falwell really, really wanted prayer in schools. And he wanted God back in schools. Even Jimmy Carter said no. And so they changed their language. And I think we're seeing some of that as well now. They changed their language to not be kind of the incendiary religious language, but to really evoke secular language. So prayer in schools was students' rights to pray. Control over what children get exposed to in schools is parental rights to, and you'll see this, control the upbringing and raising of their children. That language actually from that court case is actually related to custody. So, but you see it now everywhere. So what happens is you have these, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, you have, the Leadership Institute, it's like they brand and market certain kinds of language and use it. So how do you fight back against that? You don't necessarily, I do find myself saying, libraries do not collect pornography. Teachers are not trying to change the gender of your child. Social emotional learning is, you hear phrases like, well, social emotional, they should just have reading, writing, and math. Well, social emotional learning, do you know what it is? And I had this conversation with a campaign worker from one of the far right candidates, and we went round and round and round. I said, well, what is it? Explain to me. And he said, we don't know what it is, but we don't like it. So if you dig a little bit deeper, people are just repeating things that they are hearing. They're not thinking about, well, what is this? And one of my strategies as a journalist is to say, okay, you're going to expand vouchers. You're going to create new curriculum committees in Idaho that review everything, not letting, so what are the consequences of this? So you're saying what are the consequences of that? What does that actually look like? Because I would argue that the book thing in Keller ISD, one of the consequences is they're making it really hard for kids to get books, which I don't think anybody in that district wants. So I think we've gotten very, very familiar with all this shorthand. I don't know what woke means. I really don't. I never use it in stories because I don't know what it is. So what if we started asking, saying, well, what is it that we're trying to actually accomplish here? And these are the things we're trying to accomplish. And if you look at one of the hard things that's happening right now with the stealth stuff is that everyone has a very nice language, but if you train yourself, you can tell, give parents final say, parents already have final say. You don't need to even say that. It's like as a journalist when you're writing and someone says, I think this, editors will say, take out the they think or I think because we know they're thinking it because they're saying it. So it's the same sort of thing. And it requires just tedious vigilance. And I was going to share this thing. So I was at Wellesley College the other day, and we had a panel, and one of the people on the panel started her career way back in a school district there, and now runs the SEED project, which does a lot of inclusion work in districts all around the country. And they've had their own challenges, like people in Florida saying, "Please take me off your mailing list," and calling from a phone number that was not their regular phone. But she held this up. She said, this group just defeated the vouchers in Tennessee, and this is a little flyer that I probably sent out electronically that was like, we did it. 24 constituent meetings with state reps, 43 member quotes in the press, 2,800 constituent calls to state reps, 70 school boards passed resolutions opposing vouchers, 240 days on the Hill attendees from 18 counties, 4,200 emails to state reps, 13 state and local town halls led by parents and educators. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is a tremendous amount of work. But we also know that there's a lot of money on the far right, and the best way of countering money, aside with more money, is people and work. So.
Let me ask one more question and then we'll open it up. If anybody has any questions. Let's see, what's the one? In your book, you recognize that messages of belonging are important for everyone, especially for marginalized students. Research shows that a student's sense of belonging, feeling accepted and respected in a domain, is linked to academic performance. You say, helping students to feel comfortable, capable, and welcome primes them to learn. And this is why I'm asking. This is what the far right labels as woke. And so I guess how would you suggest approaching this as a win-win situation, which I think maybe you just answered.
Well, I have a key. So one of the things that baffles me is that 90% of children in America attend public schools. We can have 7.5% go to charter schools. So we need public schools. In 1986, 70% of those who attended were white. In 2020, 46% were white. In 2023, by 2030, 43% will be white. And my question is, how on earth can inclusion be a political issue? We need everyone to be educated, to feel they belong, because there is robust research showing that when you belong, we all feel it. When people like us, we do better. And children need to feel they belong in school. And one of the other pieces of this that I am noticing is there seems to be a level of surveillance of children's lives that's happening in schools, which I think is negative and dangerous. And what I mean by that is that school is the place where you could be a jerk one week to your friend and then be okay the next week and figure out how to navigate yourself. You could be a jock, you could be a prep, you could be a goth. You could try it all out and really self-correct, because nobody wants an adult, no kid wants an adult to tell them, you can't, you're not doing it right. Kids want to be able to have that ability to figure out things themselves. I have 3 kids. When they were teenagers, I remember saying to them, I know you're going to do things that I don't approve of and would be really unhappy, that you're doing them. And I said, don't tell me about them. Ironically, when my son turned 21, I was having a cookout in the backyard for his friends, and they started telling me all of the things they did. And I said, don't tell me, I do not want to know. So I worry that what we're doing is, and we see this with the pronoun battles, right? And there are certain districts that you probably noticed that Title IX on August 1st will include that schools, students have the right to be addressed by the pronoun that they prefer. But in the conservative states, the leaders are telling schools to ignore that directive. And there will be a bit. There have been cases. There's one in Wisconsin that they lost, and parents now have to sign off on everything. And I personally, having raised 3 kids who are fine adults, they're barely adults, we have to give them their space, I believe. But anyone have questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. My question is this, hearing all this, and we've been hearing it for years now, I believe that really one of the purposes of all of this disruption from the right is to dismantle public schools. And it's because of those statistics you just mentioned. I think that there's this sense on the right of a fear of a majority minority, if you will. And I really do think that your belief that we need public schools, they don't see it that way. A very small but powerful group of people really don't see it that way. They want to dismantle schools. They want to have a whole generation of uneducated people of color, children of color. That's really what I think is behind a lot of this. And if not consciously, that is one of the consequences of it. So to me, I guess it's like anything else. I think the response that we have to have is to just show up. I really admire the parents in the district who have been doing this for a all these years. I mean, it's exhausting what is happening. And I'm just dumbfounded that it's happening in Grosse Pointe. I'm no longer dumbfounded. But do you see any turning of the tide? I mean, you know, a lot of these right-wing groups have been sort of discredited, anyway, I'm just wondering if you see any.
Well, I think you're 100% right, and I think really well said. It is clear that the point is to destroy the public, to poke so many holes and make so many accusations that it's like, well, why do we need or have them anyhow? Why doesn't, give everybody freedom to go get your own, education? It is so clear that that is the agenda. And, we can look at, white Christian, we can go down and talk about white Christian nationalism. We can talk about, what you're referring to really are vouchers, right? The whole movement of vouchers. And it seems like every legislative session has its theme. A couple of years ago, it was criminalizing, holding librarians criminally liable for the pornography or the obscene books in libraries. And even though that seems to have died down, I did hear in Tennessee that they are going at it again in a different way. But the vouchers have been electric. And the goal of the vouchers is to basically hand people money and take it away from the public schools. I know that, and the oversight, in these voucher schools is horrible. When I did a story last spring because Florida was becoming the one that was expanding vouchers, and their huge population, they have the largest voucher system in the country. And when I looked at the Excel files before the expansion, only 4% of voucher schools in Florida were nonprofit, non-religious, and accredited. 4%. And yesterday I had a phone conversation with somebody who's done a lot of research in Florida that's looked into this, and from Integrity Florida, and I said, am I understanding this correctly? The way some of the charter schools work in Florida is that a real estate company builds something, includes a school, installs a nonprofit board, and they may have the same nonprofit board for 30 projects, and then they pay exorbitant lease rates to the real estate company, and so then the real estate company owns the asset. And he said, that's exactly right. And I was warned by a pastor in Texas who supports public schools, the very same thing. So what we'll see, and the oversight for these voucher schools, but there is no oversight. There's no, the charter schools in Florida have to be given a grade at the end of the year. How are they doing? Some of them not very well. But vouchers, they don't have to, and they can take whoever they want. You can look at the rules and they can decide, you know what? LGBTQ kids, nope. We don't want these kids. They can decide who they do and don't want. And the vouchers are, it's like segregation academies, right? It's like the mass resistance in Virginia, that same thing playing out over again. And the amount of, and we know from the early, from Arizona and even from Florida, that a large percentage of those receiving vouchers were already sending their children to private schools. And many schools don't accept vouchers. And I interviewed a mom in Florida who got vouchers because she wanted to send a voucher to send her child to a different school that would have cost twice as much, but she couldn't even get in the school. So the language again, the language, choice, freedom, but I think this is just going to be a disaster for some of these states. Like Arkansas has added vouchers. Next year is when they lift the cap entirely. So vouchers started as an opportunity for low-income kids, particularly in low-performing districts, to have an option. But now, Florida, Arizona, it's everybody. So we are seeing, and the money leaving the school, the local district schools is huge. And there are a lot, when I was doing the reporting in Florida, there are a lot of families, kids living with grandparents where they can't, there's no bus transportation, they can't get them there, they don't have the wherewithal to apply. I mean, I really do worry about exactly what you're pointing out, which is, are we going to have an entire under or non-educated class of young people who are not suited for labor other than, low-paying, low-wage labor, and at the same time, we're seeing some rolling back of child labor laws. I don't think that that's an accident, that those things are happening.
Hi, first of all, thank you both for a great talk. My question, I just wonder if, I don't know if there's something that you get into in the book or not, or if you can even speak to this, but given what you're saying about language and about the kind of backdoor, like, wheeling and dealing that goes on, and the national influence and the local things, I'm wondering if you've come across, like, what are the connections between this and, gun violence, when we see so many, school shootings and other things. I don't just mean shootings in school, but, how influential is the gun lobby in kind of all of this stuff that you're talking about too?
Yeah, huge. I mean, I think they just, was it Tennessee or Texas that just voted to arm teachers? Tennessee, yes, thought so. My daughter is a school principal in Texas. I really don't want her, to be anywhere, so there's, it's a lot of tough talk. I mean, you go down to Texas, and I mean, there is a huge relationship. All of these things connect because people want their rights protected. I'm not sure why we need automatic weapons for anything, but yes, and there's a lot of money in all of these, and they support one another. They draft legislation together. ALEC is one of those, and people have even told me that sometimes they forget to change the name of the state when they're giving people the legislation. But going back to this, that money and that influence. When I was at the first Moms for Liberty Summit, I walked out to the Noah Webster table and noticed that the head of it was just thrilled that he had signed up 600 people for an online school board training they had just started. And then the next month I discovered that the Leadership Institute, all of these groups, some of these Leadership Institute, these Cato Heritage, founded in the late 1970s, they started an online school board training. They did also create a physical place in Sarasota that Bridget Ziegler was heading for a while until she ran into some problems. But I remember sitting in a session with the Leadership Institute, the representative, and he said, we will go anywhere in the country for free and train your school board candidates how to run a campaign, what language to use, we'll give them all the materials. And I then went to look at their 990s, and I noticed between 2017 and 2021 that their annual donations had more than doubled to $49 million a year. So these places have the money to send people to do this. What I think is cool is that you have Red, Wine, and Blue is created kind of handbooks, and I saw that Liz Mkhitaryan, her group Stop Moms for Liberty, and Liz is also from Brevard County, which is the same place where Moms for Liberty started, and she's a 26-year veteran, mostly kindergarten teacher. And I remember, and I was out and meeting with her, and I said, Liz, I did not see you in Tampa in 2022. Where were you guys? She goes, well, we were kind of just getting started. She goes, we didn't we thought the Moms for Liberty was so absurd, their message, that nobody would believe it. And she said, then we realized that we had to get organized and get on it. And I think that is what we're seeing around the country, is that a lot of people didn't think anyone would believe this nonsense, but then it's becoming real. I mean, Keller ISD, I hate to share this, but they had 3 suicides in the last 2 weeks, a 5th grader and 2 high schoolers. And they've absolutely shut down. I mean, they were one of the districts where after the legislature passed a law saying that you could replace school counselors with pastors. I'm not sure if they went ahead and did that, but that was on their docket. I mean, and kids are struggling, and adults are not making it any easier for them to enjoy one another and enjoy their school experience.
I think this actually sort of overlaps with something we were just talking about, but I mean, you started earlier on talking about the librarians and the school boards taking, trying to say what's in the libraries, but you've also been talking about trust, I think, and the way in which some of these far-right organizations are trying to erode trust. And I guess I want to sort of zoom out a little bit, because I think there's a lot of mistrust going around in society of expertise. And it seems like in the school setting, it's of the educators, of the people who have studied long and hard, who have been doing this for decades, who know how to work with our kids and how to help them succeed. And then there's all these other ways in society, whether it's people mistrusting doctors and medicine and vaccines and what climate experts are saying, science. I mean, all of these other things going on. And I guess what I'm wondering about from your perspective, how do you look at, I mean, what's sort of your take on where we are in terms of the trust erosion, rebuilding the trust where it needs to be, and how that interacts with all this other stuff that's going on around us too?
So I think that's a fabulous question, and you're spot on. It is about trust. I mean, I don't remember ever doubting any of my kids' teachers, even though my daughter, who's the school principal, was dyslexic, and she had a 2nd grade teacher who spelled the spelling words wrong, and then I only found this out because I was helping Tessa. I'm like, wait, this is not right. But I didn't then decide that the school was a bad school. So the whole issue of trust is a massive one. And one of the things I keep thinking about, because I really keep thinking about, what are the antidotes to this? What are the solutions? How do we push back against this? And I look at one of the things that Kate Nazemi did in Central Bucks, because they were able to defeat their school board candidates, including having a multi-millionaire, Paul DiMartino, loading money in there. And right before I visited in February, 2 remaining Moms for Liberty school board members just resigned, because I guess it was just more, school board is actually a lot of work. But one of the things that she's done is she said, you know what, we have to not just focus on their branding and their language and all of this. We have to remind people what our collective goal is and how we're going to get there. And one of the things that I think quite a lot about is that what's so powerful about public schools is community. That is why rural Texas Republicans pushed back against Greg Abbott for vouchers, because their local schools are the centers of their community, whether or not you have a kid in the school or not. It's where you go, it's the local auditorium, it's where the bingo is, it's where the football is. Public schools are the magnet for community. And I think Kate's notion that Remind people the value of that. I can tell you as a public school student myself, and even as a PTO mom, I did not know what anyone's politics were. I didn't care, it did not matter, because it was about that feeling you have when you walk through the hallway, you wave to the kids you know that are in the class and they feel good because you see them, you know the other parents. That's what it's about. We've forgotten that is the beautiful thing that this is about. And I think to the extent that we remind people about that, and then how we're gonna get there. And that was Kate's other thing, is like, this is the goal. We want everyone to feel like they belong, that we want everyone in our district to get a good education, and this is how we're gonna do it. And these are the reasons why we're gonna do it. And she also said something that I think was a delightful way of skirting kind of inflammatory language. And she said, everyone can agree that everyone deserves to be who they say they are. Right? I mean,
I think there are people who don't agree. Oh, seriously, I do.
everyone deserves to be who they say they are. And that is a way of talking, I think, about identity in a way that is non-confrontational. It's really hard, I think, for people to disagree with. But I think reminding people what they're losing when we're just having big fights over books.
I have a question, just as a journalist, doing such deep reporting on something, on a topic that you feel very strongly about. Do you find it difficult, I'm sure, how do you balance that objectivity and when you're writing, and did you feel that you were able to open up more in your book to express how you felt at all, or did you feel those same restrictions?
Well, I didn't know that I cared this much about public schools. I mean, to be honest, I went to them, I was on the school board in, my town, and I am embarrassed to say that I fell asleep in a lot of the meetings. I played sports, I had a job, I'd get to the school board meeting, and Ellen Moore, with her, she'd always wear these mint green blouses, and she'd sit there and she'd talk in a very steady tone, and it was like, and it was and I was so embarrassed. Now I realize that was a good thing, because the grown-ups were taking care of business. And I didn't really, I just took them for granted, like I think a lot of people did. We just assumed they would just always be there. My job was to find the junk that wasn't working and to say, hey guys, you say you're doing this, but you're not. You say that the kids in Brockton, Massachusetts are getting the same education as the kids in Weston, but they're not, and this is what it looks like when I'm spending, sitting in the back of a classroom with 35 kids and they are sharing textbooks, and then I'm in Weston and people are told, pass if they don't want to answer the teacher's question. It's a very different culture and a different expectation. So I have spent most of my career finding things that worked, finding things that didn't work. So I didn't know that I had a view on public education, but my view is none other than, let's get back to the critiques, because we need public schools for our democracy. And this is a conversation that's actually happening a lot in journalism, and I'm on a panel. I don't know if any of you have read Nicole Carr in ProPublica, some of her pieces, or Mike Hicksenbach of NBC News, who did a great podcast, Grapevine, and with Antonia Hilton, and also Southlake. Take a listen, it's fantastic. The three of us are on a journalism panel at the Education Writers Association at the end of this month. And one of the issues is that at the very beginning of all this, a lot of education journalists who hadn't done this for a while were thinking, well, we have to do both sides. If Moms for Liberty is saying this, we have to say, and I saw, situations where they were being called a grassroots organization. They're hardly a grassroots organization. And then, so there was this kind of quote unquote both sides journalism. Well, no. And the field has kind of come around like, okay, that, because one is off the, it's why people fact check Donald Trump, right? Because you're not doing a very good public service if you're just repeating the things that they're saying, if the things that they're saying are untrue. If we're saying that social emotional learning is Marxist indoctrination, we're not really helping people understand what social emotional learning is. So for me, it's not confusing at all. It's not this kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm not being objective. My objectivity is that we need public, as a society, as we need them as an institution. How they perform and whether they're doing a good job or not a good job, that's a different conversation. But we have to be able to have the schools before we can get into the critiquing business. And unfortunately, we're attacking them so relentlessly that it's very hard for them to do their jobs.
All right. Oh, I have a question. Laura, could you talk a little bit about why public schools are so important to democracy?
Well, public schools, they gather everyone. Nobody, in this society where you need to be famous or have a ticket or some little extra, bonus thing in order to get into things. Public schools take everybody. And you go there and you figure out how to deal with people who are different from you and get along or not get along or navigate. Now, I would argue that, there are some kids for whom traditional public school doesn't work and they need a different strategy, but those are a handful of people, and I respect that. I've spent time early in the charter school movement going to Roxbury Prep and Mission Hill. John King ran that, and going to Match and Amistad, and they did some good work. But one of the differences that I'm noticing is that with the voucher and the charter, and they're not the same, but they're blurring a little bit in some places, is that the old question used to be, how can we do this so much better? What can we bring to the table? What great ideas? That's not what the conversation is about now. Now it's about how can we make some money. And we need public schools because the question in public schools is not how can we make some money. The question is, how can we educate everyone to the best of our ability so that they can be citizens that participate in our society? And not just that, participate in their own lives, have agency, feel like they matter. I am just, the Keller thing was just, I learned about it yesterday. I was texting with the people in Keller. It's just so distressing. We need every kid deserves to be educated. Every kid deserves to grow up believing that there is a place for them in society, that they can find a way to be successful. And really great public education helps them figure that out. So I don't think we have a democracy if we don't count everybody. Then we don't have a democracy. And I do, talking about up and down the ballot, the more stories I read about the kind of plans for the Trump presidency, the autocracy, it is becoming so plain and obvious and frightening that, and that is, that's why I think it's so important that people like you all are paying attention and showing up and turning out and telling other people. As one of the members of Red, Wine, and Blue told me, she said, the thing about parents and community members is, activists usually just know other activists. Parents, moms, dads, community members, they know everybody. And you can have conversations. And I actually think that I hope that out of this, that we use this as an engine for, okay, once we can make sure we have public schools, let's actually make them better. So.
Well, thank you so much, Laura.
We have one more question.
One more question?
Yep.
Okay, go right ahead.
You've talked a lot about Florida and Texas and Idaho, but you haven't said anything about Michigan. Do you have any kind of perspective on what's taking place
Like
in Michigan?
Mallory McMorrow. She's, I mean, I give her so much credit. I mean, Michigan right now is very democratic and very focused on, I mean, you're not gonna pass vouchers in here, but next door in Wisconsin, things are looking a lot different. And I know that you guys sometimes play different roles with each other, but I think that Michigan is well poised right now as in the legislature at the state level and the gubernatorial level, but doesn't mean that on the ground you're not gonna see very different outcomes that can be problematic. And I mean, Michigan, there's reason to pay attention and be concerned. And that's one of the things that, that's one of the things I learned about the Idaho is I sat down with a school board person who involved mom, runs a preschool in town. I said, Haley, how did you lose to this guy who was called by God to run it and has no relationship whatsoever with the school district? And she said, everyone just assumed I would win, so they didn't show up. So, yes, it feels good right now, but I told Kate, I asked Kate, I said, after you guys were held up nationally as defeating Moms for Liberty and like, whew, I said, is it over? And she said, absolutely not. She goes, I know that those groups are already organizing for the next election. 2024 will be very consequential. The exact conversation that I was having in Brevard County, Florida, where they were very concerned, and they have a little book ban, free giveaway library that I did a little video of, and they were sitting there brainstorming about getting high school students to register to vote, which they've long done. And the League of Women Voters used to set up a table in the high school and do that. In the count in Brevard, they said the local officials are refusing to allow that on school grounds. And so they were trying to figure out where else could we get kids to do this, and then do we need to drive them to the polls? And it's really turnout is going to matter so much on the school boards, on committees, on state reps. We look what happened to the Ohio legislature, right? You look at what huge things, especially if, abortion rights, you have so many things happening on a national level where what is happening in your state and your community is gonna matter even more. So, in Howard County, last Friday, someone said, well, we all know, the Moms for Liberty, and it's all crazy. Do we really need to show up at all these meetings? And I said, you actually do, because you're marinating in this knowledge and this ideas, and you see what's happening, but a lot of people are confused. And as one of my conversation partners up in New Haven, wonderful PhD psychologist, brilliant, head of the Gazelle Institute, the Yale Child Study Center, does a lot of outreach in communities with parent groups. And she said, until I read your book, I didn't know that Parents Defending Education was a national group. She goes, because they're showing up at this local school board meeting, making all these demands. So people who, like you all, who know, need to share what you know. So, can I get a picture of all of you guys? Like, just like a big, well, let's thank her first.